All right, today we're talking about Franz Schubert. Now, you might know him as the guy who wrote some of the most beautiful music, like ever, but what if I told you he also created a piece of music so hard, so impossible, that it was like his own personal, unbeatable video game boss?
Yeah, seriously.
Let's get into it. I mean, think about it for a second. Have you ever, designed a level in a game that was so tough, even you couldn't beat it? Or maybe you built some crazy Lego creation and couldn't figure out how to finish it. It's a wild concept, right? To be totally stumped by something you made yourself?
Well, that's almost exactly what happened to Schubert. He wrote this piano piece called The Wanderer Fantasy, and it wasn't just hard, it was totally revolutionary. It was so demanding that it pushed the limits of what a piano and, frankly, what any pianist could even do. And yeah, that included Schubert himself.
Okay, so how does someone get so good that they can write a piece of music that's, well, basically impossible to play? Well, like any great hero's origin story, it all starts with a training montage.
So from a super young age, Schubert was a total musical prodigy. I mean, he started learning from his dad and his older brother, but he leveled up so fast that he quickly outgrew their lessons. Then he gets this formal training as a choir boy, and get this, he even studied composition with Antonio Salieri. You know, the guy who was like a legit rock star composer back then. All this training gave him the XP he needed to eventually go on and rewrite the entire rulebook of music.
Right, so once he mastered all the basic skills, Schubert started developing his own unique style. Think of these as his musical power-ups, special abilities that were about to change the game of classical music forever.
See, before Schubert came along, a lot of classical music was kind of like playing a game with a super strict rulebook. You had to follow the formal structures perfectly. But Schubert? Nah, he was a total rule breaker. He cared way more about emotion and feeling. He started writing these gorgeous, flowing melodies that made the piano sound less like a machine and more like a human voice singing an incredible story.
And he had some serious signature moves. Like, he would use these surprising chord changes that would just instantly flip the mood, kind of like a sudden plot twist in a movie. He'd mix these really intense, high-energy rhythms with super delicate, quiet moments. But his ultimate move, his finisher, he took the style of his popular songs, they were called Lieder, and he brought that over to the piano. He basically taught this big wooden box of hammers and strings how to sing.
All right, so let's get into the main event. Let's talk about the final boss itself, the Wanderer Fantasy, and figure out what makes it so legendary and so ridiculously hard to play.
So what's the first thing that makes this piece so wild? It's the structure. Schubert used this technique called cyclic form. And the best way to think about it is like a video game's main theme song, you know? You hear it on the start screen, right? But then you also hear a faster, more epic version during a boss fight, or maybe a slower, sadder version during an emotional cutscene. It's the same melody, but it keeps changing to fit the vibe. That is exactly what Schubert did with one core musical idea through this entire massive piece.
The whole thing is basically broken down into 4 connected levels. First, you get this huge, energetic, heroic opening. Then it slows down for this really thoughtful, contemplative section where you hear that main Wanderer theme. After that, it ramps right back up into a super lively dance. And the finale? It's this incredibly complex musical puzzle called a fugue. And here's the real kicker. You have to play all of it without any breaks. It's one non-stop 20-minute musical marathon. So that main theme, the one that ties the whole piece together, where did it come from? Well, he actually recycled it from one of his own songs. It was a pretty sad song called Der Wanderer, or The Wanderer, and it's all about a lonely traveler trying to find a place to belong. So what that does is it gives this whole instrumental piece a kind of secret, hidden story. It gives it this really deep emotional weight. And this is probably the most mind-blowing part of the whole story. Even Schubert, the genius who wrote the thing, couldn't play it perfectly. There's this famous story that one time during a performance, he was struggling so much he got completely frustrated and just stopped. He actually yelled out to his friends, "Let the devil play it." I mean, can you believe that? He had literally designed a level that he himself could not beat. You know, a huge part of the difficulty was just the raw physical power you needed to play it. Schubert wanted this piece to make a single piano sound like an entire orchestra. The sound profile is just massive compared to a standard piano sonata. He was using these giant chords in what they call thunderous octaves. That's when you're hammering the same note with both hands really far apart. It created this huge, overwhelming wall of sound that pushed the pianos back then to their absolute breaking point.
So, this impossible piece,
It wasn't just some one-off challenge he set for himself. No way. It was part of a huge body of work that left an absolutely massive mark on the history of music. So let's talk about his legacy for a minute.
First of all, the guy was an absolute composing machine. On top of these giant complex piano works, he also wrote over 600 songs. 600! And he completely changed what a song could even be. See, before Schubert, the piano was usually just background music for the singer. But Schubert made the piano an equal partner. The music itself was telling just as much of the story as the words were.
And his influence was just enormous. You had later composers like Franz Liszt who were absolutely obsessed with the Wanderer fantasy. Schubert proved that a composer could be a master of both these small, intimate songs and these epic, orchestral-sounding pieces. He basically took the whole fantasy genre, which used to be kind of like a loose, free-form jam session, and he completely leveled it up into something powerful and structured and epic.
But here's the most crucial point, the one thing you really got to remember about all this. Schubert died tragically young. He was only 31 years old. 31. And yet, in that incredibly short time, he created this entire musical world. A world so full of new ideas and deep emotion that musicians are still exploring it today, still learning from it hundreds of years later.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? His music, everything from a simple little song to his impossible fantasy, it's all still challenging and inspiring people right now, today. And it leaves us with a really big question to chew on. What is it that makes an idea powerful enough to outlive its own creator?